Welcome. This is Bill Free with Pure Presence Conferences. We're here to talk about the conference that's coming up in April 22nd to the 24th. And I'm so excited with our presenters for this conference. And I'm truly appreciative and honored to also have Judith Blackstone live for the Know Thyself conference. Thank you, Judith, for being here live today on Facebook.
Thank you for inviting me, Bill.
You're welcome. Well, it's my honor. I look for teachers, presenters, non-dual teachers who have a clear understanding of the non-dual path or the non-dual idea, that able to transmit it and share it in a fairly easy way and simple way. And I know that this has been your thing for decades. You're very well known in the non-dual circles, and I found you as a presenter on SAN, Science and Non-Duality. And I connected that, oh my God, she really knows what she's talking about, and she shares it in a way that doesn't go shoo over my head with intellectual. Of course, you have an intellectual understanding, but you don't put it over my head. And I like to think that my head represents at least the average mindset on the spiritual path of non-dual teaching and spiritual understanding. And so I'm going to give this audience, you guys on Facebook, you men and women, they that are on Facebook, a little bit of Judith's background. She has a master's degree in transpersonal psychology and a PhD in psychology and Eastern religion and embodiment. And she trained at the Institute for Integrative Psychotherapy in New York City, and she has 35 years of clinical experience as a psychotherapist and is now retired from private practice. And she studied with many teachers in the Hindu traditions, Advaita Vedanta, as many of you are familiar with, Bhakti and Kashmir Shaivism, and the Zen Buddhist and Tibetan Buddhist traditions. And she and her husband, Zoran, founded the Non-Duality Institute, dedicated to the practice and scientific study of non-duality. And her session title for the Know Thyself conference is The Realization Process, How the Self Knows the Self. And I know you're going to enjoy Judith. Judith, thank you for being here today. And what would you just kind of introduce us a little bit to this idea of the realization process, and how just maybe a soundbite of how the self knows the self, and what would someone expect at your session in the conference?
Sure. The realization process, and I'm going to teach the two main practices of the realization process in that session, in the conference. It's a series of practices, and all of the practices are designed to help us uncover in ourselves a very subtle dimension of consciousness. It's undivided consciousness. It's experienced as undivided consciousness, and that means that we experience it pervading our whole body, everywhere at once, and at the same time pervading our body and environment. It provides us in that way with both a sense of our individual wholeness, and at the same time, in the same way, our oneness with other people and with our whole environment, with everything around us.
Mm-hmm. So the folks that are in your session will actually experience that relationship, that oneness that you're speaking about.
Yes, it's the presentation is almost entirely experiential. I'll introduce it, of course, and then I'll take questions, and even I don't know if the setup will be that I can see people at all, but I can, to some extent, help people with the experiences and with the practices if anyone wants that assistance after the presentation. So really, we're just going to do the attunement to that fundamental, I call it fundamental consciousness pervading everywhere. Of course, the attunement is not the realization itself. The realization is unconstructed, uncontrived. It appears, but it doesn't just appear out of grace. It usually requires some inward contact with ourselves, and that's what the exercises do, the practices. They help us make very deep inward contact with ourselves so that we can let go into that spontaneously appearing fundamental consciousness. So it's a preparation for realization, but at the same time, it gives us a glimpse of it right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, your session, all the sessions for the conference will be set up as meetings. So you'll see hundreds
Wonderful.
you'll see
I much
hundreds
prefer
of
that.
faces looking back at you and being able to engage, and it'll be very engaging, and I'm happy to hear it will be experiential.
Yeah.
And can you walk us through something that would give an idea of what a glimpse would look like?
Well, I can tell you that we do it first by inhabiting the internal space of the body, and we do it part by part by part, because if we just say, okay, now I'm going to inhabit my body, we'll generally leave out those parts of ourselves that we habitually leave out, like our legs, for example, very important part of ourselves, or our arms, or our chest, or some very important part of ourselves that we are generally not living within. That we have either a little constriction, or we just have a habit of knowing ourselves and relating to the world from somewhere in front of ourselves rather than from within ourselves. So we begin by inhabiting the body and really experiencing what it's like to be present within our body. And amazingly, just by inhabiting the body, it actually uncovers qualities that seem to be innate, because we do uncover them, we don't create them. A feeling of power in our belly, which helps us feel more empowered and more effective in our life, feeling of love in our chest, quality of our own intelligence, so that we actually feel that aliveness. And at the same time, we're also able to let go, because so amazingly, inward contact with ourselves is at the same time letting go of ourselves. So when we inhabit the whole body, we find that we can also find the space outside our body and feel that there's a continuity and experience of space pervading our body and pervading everything around us, so that we experience our own bodies both solid and made of consciousness at the same time. And we even, can take a little practice, experience our furniture, our friends, as made of whatever substance they are, and at the same time as made of consciousness. So that's the first practice. And then the next practice, we attune to a very subtle channel that we can experience running through the innermost core of our torso, neck, and head. This channel is referred to in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, where it's called the central channel. And it's referred to in Hinduism, Hindu yoga, where it's called Sushumna. And the chakras are conceived of as being along Sushumna. So it's a very important part of ourselves for realizing ourselves, for realizing the foundational self, the self with a capital S.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that's not an impersonal self. It really feels like who we are. And yet it probably feels pretty much the same in all of us. So we attune to, the second exercise, we attune to very deep within our core and breathing within those core points, and then feeling that we can let go from within that core into the pervasive space of fundamental consciousness.
Nice. Very nice. Well, I can hear some of the Course in Miracles students that are watching. This is a Course in Miracles Facebook group. That's by that name, A Course in Miracles. And I can hear them saying, well, the Course teaches I'm not a body, I'm free, I'm still as God created me. And so there's a little bit of a learning gap, or an understanding, a vernacular of understanding how do we connect with consciousness and the body, and not be the body all at the same time. So I can hear that going on. Do you have any response to that?
I do. It's not the physical body I'm talking about, but it is our form. So it's a very, very subtle dimension of the body that we do experience edges to ourselves. And I think that's actually quite important, that we are whole within ourselves. We are separate beings that can relate to each other, but at the same exact time and in the same way, we transcend that individuality, and we feel that one space that pervades our own being, that's experienced as the ground of our own being, is also the ground of all being. So I don't think you're going to find a lot of conflict between those two views. Maybe just a little bit of a riff on it,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's another, of course, I know in my own understanding, I know that consciousness, God, awareness, those are all the same. Those are all synonymous as the same of consciousness. So we're speaking, when we use the term God is this consciousness that we begin to, or we have a knowing of our own being, is that which is called God. Yes?
Yes, I don't use the term God, but I can certainly
Yes.
understand making that equation.
Yeah, well, only so that you can have an equal sign when someone uses, like there's a Course in Miracles workbook lesson that says God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. Well, when we extrapolate that, or we equal that to consciousness, now we're speaking, okay, consciousness is in everything I see because consciousness is what I am.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think you could make that, inference.
Yes. Yeah. And that's just an idea. It's an idea so that people can relate to, well, where's God in all this? I remember getting an email just a few days ago, and someone had said, well, where's the Holy Spirit in all of this? And sometimes you get questions where people are looking for, well, where's that character? Is he left out or she left out?
Yeah.
So it can be helpful to put an equation that allows someone to connect the other to the language of the language of the non-dual is new, even though a lot of Course in Miracles students think that the Course in Miracles is non-dual. In my mind, it's progressive. It's a progressive path. And when I found non-duality, I thought, wow, this is kind of missing from A Course in Miracles. And that's when I became interested in teachers like yourself and Rupert, Spira, Francis, Lucille, and others that frequent the science and non-duality.
Yes. Yeah. And many of the mystics, I think the Christian mystics, and I think some of the Jewish mystics as well. And although I'm not as familiar, probably all of the Western mystics do come to that sort of equation, in their writing and in their teachings.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And I so appreciate that teachers like yourself, teachers like Jean Klein and Francis Lucille and many other, and of course, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, all of those great teachers, if they've gone before us, opening up the doorway of understanding so that we can easily access what they were pointing to. And just as you are one of those teachers now that is pointing to this realization process, because everyone, I mean, almost everyone is interested in, how do I reach this understanding of awakening? How do I have the direct experience for myself?
Yes, sure. Once you're drawn to it, once it catches your interest, you're ready for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the realization. So the realization process is the non-dual understanding where we connect with our I am, right? We
Yes.
connect with the I am. Is it a two-step where we first identify what we are by negating what we're not, and then include everything after we've established our primary identity? How does that?
Not in the realization process, but there's certainly that technique in, for example, Ramana Maharshi or in the Hindu system, where we're not our emotions, we're not our body. But that doesn't mean that we don't have emotions. It just means that we can find ourselves and identify with something that's more subtle, deeper, and more unchanging. That's unchanging. Yeah. And once we know ourselves, actually, but by know I mean experience ourselves as the fundamental consciousness, which is actually experienced as stillness, then we can more fluidly experience our emotions moving through, all of the temporal content of experience moves through that stillness. It doesn't negate the content, but the content is seen as changing and as secondary in some way to that fundamental ground of ourselves, that unchanging ground.
Right.
And
right.
I'm just speaking experientially here. I'm not making a metaphysical claim for it because I don't really have any sort of direct way of knowing the actual, what it is, what this fundamental consciousness is. So in the realization process, I only approach it experientially. I know we can experience it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it can't be really. So I mean, as the subjective ideal or subjectivity that it is, how can it possibly be described?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's obvious it's been experienced. And if we look through the spiritual literature, going way back, thousands of years, it's an experience that human beings are capable of and that we've always valued. It's a valuable experience, which is so interesting that this is something we really value because it's really our greatest openness to life and the greatest fluidity of our love, the greatest upwelling of our love and our understanding of life and so forth, our connection with life. So it's always been valued, it's always been sought after, and it has been described, but it's been interpreted in different ways in the different lineages, the different spiritual traditions. So there is argument about what metaphysically or ontologically it really is, but there seems to be agreement that it is a possible way for us to experience ourselves in the world.
Yeah. And how would you say this understanding, this realization process, how would you say that it helps us to deal with personal family matters or relationship matters or the war in Ukraine? How does this help someone to live through these experiences without so much being drawn to it?
Yeah, it helps in many different ways. For one thing, fundamental consciousness experienced as undivided stillness. It's unbreakable. It's experienced as space. I mean, it's palpable, it's there, and yet it's only spacious. It's only transparency in space. So it hasn't been injured, and yet we can experience it as the ground of our being. And that means we can experience our own actual self, ourself, as being fundamentally unbreakable. So all of the content of experience, no matter how horrible really, can move through that. Doesn't mean that we don't respond to it. And that's very important. It's not a state of detachment. It's a state of disentanglement. So we can respond to, we can let the horror of whatever's going on in the world into our awareness, and we can respond to it. We can mourn, we can fear, we can anger, but without shattering our basic ongoing stillness, who we really are. So that continues no matter what. And the same with connecting with our family or with people who are challenging for us, who maybe in the past did make us feel, or we reacted to them by feeling diminished or broken or fragmented. We can now uncover that unbreakable ground of ourselves and even give that other person space to exist as who they are, which will sometimes change the dynamic between ourselves and that other person, just in that. But it may not, they may not know this at all, but at least we have that sense of being still connected with our own being, unbreakable, no matter who we're relating with. The other aspect of this is that we feel much more contact. Fundamental consciousness pervading everything is a dimension of contact. So when two people are both attuned to it, they feel deep mutual contact with each other. Contact is a very difficult thing to describe in words, but hopefully we've all felt it. And we all know when we're not feeling it, when we're somehow cut off from that contact or limited in that contact. So as this ground of our being, as this self with a capital S, we can contact other people very, very deeply and feel a resonance, love to love, understanding to understanding, power to power, and so forth throughout our whole being. But we experience that without losing inward contact with ourselves. And I think that's very important, especially for spiritually oriented people who tend to be rather sensitive. We tend to often lose ourselves in relationship, and whatever the other person wants or needs becomes, center stage for us. But as fundamental consciousness pervading our own being, at the same time as it pervades the other person's being, we're aware of our own needs and preferences at the same time that we feel that oneness with the other person.
Mm.
So it goes a long way to healing what we call attachment problems, right? Where we have to either close off or merge with the other person.
Right, right. And this this idea of being established as your, the Course in Miracles calls it, that we, as we awaken, it says that enlightenment is not a change, it's but a recognition of what we are always. And I feel that that's what the realization process is also teaching us. Is how it's not just teaching us. It's, as you're describing it, you're inviting us to have our own direct experience, so that we don't have. It's not because Judith said so or Rupert said so, or it's because we're able to realize in our own experience the knowing of our own being. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think, the more this awakening spreads, this used to be spreading, we're getting further and further away from the era of the guru. I mean, not that hasn't been very helpful in my life and in many people's lives, more at the beginning of the path. But then if we really don't need to exalt another human being in order to feel our own truth, our own authenticity. And I know for myself and many of the teachers who consider themselves to be non-dual teachers, we don't consider ourselves to be gurus, certainly not advising anyone on their ethical stance or how they should behave or think, but only a guide, realization process, only a series of practices. Really has nothing to do with me at all, with my presence, just practices that we can all do to uncover this ground of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And I agree with that. It's just not it's not necessary to, and I love gurus. I love Muji. He's a friend of mine, and I've been to his ashram. I plan to go to India this year and visit Ramana Maharshi's ashram, and out of, I want to kind of connect with our Anashala and some of the Indian history,
Yeah.
that all of these teachings have come from there. And I am very appreciative to the gurus that came to the United States, like the Yogananda and many others, that Osho and lots of great teachers that left a legacy of the taste of awakening.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
now it is much more common.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the Tibetan Rinpoches as well. Call
Yeah.
out to them.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And so, Judith, I really look forward to your experiential presentation and session for the Know Thyself conference. I want to thank you for being a part of it. And we're about a month away from that conference. What would you say to the listeners to prepare their hearts, their minds, or their interest in the visiting, having 25 or 26 speakers to present these different ideas to them? What would you
Yeah.
suggest that they
Well, you have to follow your own lights, whatever you're drawn to, whatever practices you're drawn to. So much is available now to us from all over the world. We have everything at our fingertips. So if there are practices that you're drawn to or books that you're drawn to, then follow that line of attraction to your own path.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And one more question I have, Judith. Does the realization process, does it give us a connection with inner guidance or that kind of
I think it
intuition?
does. It's a deepened contact with yourself. So there's necessarily a much deeper knowing of what we need and what the next step is and what to do. We can call it guidance. Doesn't matter what we call it, but that in that depth of contact with ourselves, there's a knowing of ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's great. I love that understanding and that answer, and that's been my experience too. It seems like intuitively, my memory or my beliefs or some experience that Bill had is no longer running the show. It's almost like there's just a movement, and Bill knows what to do next, but it's coming from a different place. I don't understand it. Well, thank you for this, taking the time out of your schedule to share with us this Facebook Live and allow people to get to hear you and see you and connect with the energy of Judith Blackstone, so that when they come to the conference, they'll just automatically know who you are.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. And if you're watching Facebook Live, we've dropped a link in there for you that you would just click that link and you can register for free for the Know Thyself conference. And there's some bonuses in there for you and all kinds of cool stuff that our team put together. And we're looking forward to sharing this conference with all of you and Judith Blackstone. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.